Welcome everybody here, week 4 of XFL 2023. I'm going to call it Rod Woodson and the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. Rod Woodson not having the best time right now with the XFL. We will talk about that all today. Everything XFL week 4. We have Andrew Murray standing by and then a special guest as well. Appreciate it. We're going to bring in first and foremost the Professor Andrew Murray, the Shannon Sharp to my Skip Bayless. Andy, how are you?
Skip. It's all right. Doing all right today, man. How you doing?
I'm good. I finally was able to sit and watch. I watched all day XFL yesterday. I have not had the opportunity to do that yet. It's feeling real now. We can get into it with Evan as well, but it's feeling real. I felt some emotions watching the Battlehawks day yesterday. So overall good. You enjoying things?
Yeah, I don't know if I saw as many people hanging from the rafters as I thought I was hoping for. I was waiting for some some lights to fall down, some scenery to get destroyed. But no, I'm doing well. I had a really fun time watching this past weekend, which we'll get into later.
Yeah, this was good. This was good here. Jenna's checking in. Scott's checking in as well. Scott and I just talking on the Facebook. And now we're going to bring in live from, I think, Cabo, the Jen Hale here on a bearded Jen Hale today. We have Evan Willsmore with XFL News Hub. Evan, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. Yeah, excited to break down all the games from this week. It was I thought, pretty decent slate. Maybe nothing too surprising, but I enjoyed it. Yeah, like you said before, it's starting to feel pretty real now between St. Louis and everything else. So, yeah.
It's feeling good. I think, like I said, finally, it was the craziest first couple weeks and going to the kickoff and Evan's trying, we're all kind of going all over the place. Like, to be able to sit now, watch, I thought it was a lot of fun. We also have USFL TV stuff we can talk about today as well if we want on kind of this live Monday morning. I just remember when we hit 3,500 subscribers, we will be giving away 2 tickets to either the XFL Championship game in San Antonio or I think it's TBD according to the broadcast schedule for the USFL Championship game here. So make sure you're liked and subscribed for that. We'll break down everything else. It was a really exciting weekend. Andy and I have a new CFL media feud we can get into later as well. First off, Andy, big takeaways from the weekend.
The Battlehawks came back in historic fashion. I mean, they were out to prove something yesterday, and they did. It was kind of incredible with how much energy was in that building. Even you prepare for it, you anticipate it, you talk about it, you mull over it for however long it was. I think it said on the broadcast 1,107 days since there was pro football in St. Louis. And yet we get there and it was just overwhelming. Like, the amount of energy in that building was insane. The Austin Prohl, grabbing the mic, getting the crowd hyped up. Anthony Becht doing his best hype man impression. I mean, everybody was just there rocking and rolling for anything. Like, that was an incredible event. I saw a lot of non XFL people tweeting about it, a lot of NFL media people talking about it, because obviously St. Louis formerly being an NFL city, getting that many people to show up for a spring football crowd is insane. And they could have had more. I think they really could have if they really had decided to sell those seats. So that's me. I mean, that was going to be the biggest takeaway. But even for me, it's still, you just can't mentally prepare yourself enough for an event like that. That's kind of what I realized.
Yeah, Evan, thoughts on St. Louis?
I mean, I thought it was great. In terms of attendance, the only team that really comes close to that is San Antonio. But even that in the Alamo Dome did not compare to the Dome in St. Louis. It was fantastic. I think St. Louis, I think the Battlehawks are there to stay. I think Stan Kroenke was definitely wrong when he said St. Louis is not a football city. And I'm a Rams fan, right? I know, obviously they're in LA now, and I'm a fan of the LA Rams, but you have to give credit to St. Louis and everything that was accomplished there. But you can see why, those fans, I mean, they've been waiting for so long, and they only had a little taste of it in 2020. I forget how many games they actually played in St. Louis before the week 6 or week 5 shutdown. It was only 2. Yeah. So this is only the 3rd time they're playing in the Dome, the Battlehawks are. But you saw that crowd, and you would have thought it was the 100th time. It was a special event. So, there was probably going to be more people there than normal. But even then, that crowd was fired up, and I would expect it to be the same for the rest of their home games this season.
It was cool. I have been very whelmed by the XFL thus far this season, and part of that, I don't think it's ever going to feel like it did back in 2020. And I remember Paul and I being in DC and just like, it felt like 2 years and we're going, and now we're kind of going through all of the minutia and we're, fighting with people online and we're, talking to CFL, we're doing all this other stuff. The rollout has been interesting, right? And we've talked the Vegas thing to death and we've talked kind of all this other stuff. It really did feel like yesterday, like that, like this was what was promised all along. Like we're 1/8 of the way. Okay, we've got that now. We need to figure out some other stuff, but it really did live up to it. Brian had emailed out yesterday morning from the Battlehawks, hey, we're expecting 38,000, and you knew it was going to be rocking. They sold everything that was available. They Coach Beck said they still have space to fill here in the remaining weeks. So very excited, and I'm glad that words got through the XFL that it was an XFL attendance record, not a spring football attendance record, because I think we were walking the fine line there, and I'm glad that however that came about, I think we know how that came about, but cooler heads and that all kind of got squared away. Andy, were you afraid of the PR backlash of the player 54 combined with the spring football attendance record?
Clearly not, because I sent out a tweet yesterday saying that's the biggest attendance of any alternative football event, at least for the last 2 years, because I mean, it is. Like there are bigger stadiums, obviously, in some of these venues than there are with the Edwards Dome, but obviously there hasn't been as much capacity in some of these other events. But yeah, look, I would have just said it's the 21st century mark. That's basically it. Like, it's the biggest attendance in the 21st century of spring alternative football. That would have been my qualifier, but maybe it's obviously not as fun to qualify those things when you're sending it out in the tweet and just putting out, hey, it's the biggest spring crowd. It sounds a lot sexier, but yeah, I mean, you have to be fair to history and you have to be fair to all the, the precedings before that, all the, whether it's Canadian football being here or whether it's USFL in the old days in the 80s, whether it's all that, it really depends on like how you qualify it. So for me though, I mean, it's still in this day and age to have that many people again at a game like that in only the year, I guess in a year and a half of the, actually, no, not even, like we haven't even reached a full actual calendar of games yet. It's only been like 9 games total if you're counting 2020. So for that to happen is pretty incredible.
Yeah, I did, and I'll get to Evan here. Mike has a comment here. USFL, Twitter trolls trying to. The thing to me is like, I don't think The Rock is Rolodexing back in his mind like CFL 19, Baltimore, the Baltimore whatever back in, but also like USFL in the 80s is not the USFL today. So when it's like, that's fine. That existed before you were even a thought in your parents' minds. Let's just be happy now. We got about 3 Argos games worth of fans yesterday, so let's be happy with that. Evan, any other thoughts on this? And then we can go kind of game by game breakdown here.
Right. So I think piggybacking off you with the USFL stuff, I mean, you're right. The USFL in the 80s is not the USFL now. And there is a lot of people saying, oh, well, the USFL in the 80s was attracting much larger crowds. I think one game had upwards of 70,000. But, at that time, and I think it was Mike Mitchell who brought it up, the USFL was competing for players from the NFL, whereas now both the XFL and the USFL are sort of a step below the NFL. You're not really competing for players that would be in the NFL. You have guys that, fell out of the NFL or just never got that shot, whatever the case is. So I think it's hard to compare those. And even if you do want to compare them, I mean, hell, that was 40 years ago. I mean, the fact that we're, here in 2023, 3 years after the XFL left, and there's still that level of fan interest, at least for, St. Louis and a couple other teams too, have drawn pretty good crowds. The fact that that's still there, I think is phenomenal. We really need to appreciate that for what it is.
Yeah, it's a team, like you said, that played 2 home games 3 years ago, went away, and now came back. Like, let's just be happy. Let's be happy. Bigger crowd than we saw in Birmingham last year, bigger crowd than we saw. I would wager to say, and we'll see what St. Louis attendance says here the next couple of weeks, but could be bigger than any attendance we see in USFL this year. We'll have to see, and I don't know what Memphis is going to draw, and I don't know what Detroit's going to draw, but certainly there. We talk more Battlehawks later. Let's go game in reverse. I watched this. This was a fun one. The Rod Woodson, Invitational Classic out there, having his worst life. Vegas falls again to DC. Rowdy crowd, a little rainier, not as many people as last week, but still good attendance. I will say I'm over the beer snake now. Officially, we're done talking about it on the broadcast every 5 seconds. Andy, what did you make of the beer snake and the Audi field and everything else?
I think you're going to have to get prepared for 2 more times of it, Reed. I'm sorry, but that's just how it is. It's the narrative that's going to be overplayed over and over again. And look, ESPN and FX are going to be doing that ad nauseum because that's kind of the easiest storyline to go after. And that's sort of how you build, identity in the league. That's kind of what they're going for. But I mean, of the Battle of the Snakes, it was clear which one was going to come out and prevailing. And look, the Defenders are now undefeated at home. They are 5-0 at home. No, 6-0, excuse me, at home all time now. And they have been just lights out in the second half. They've always been able to run the ball with authority. Their defense comes bearing down on every team that comes in there. And they just, I don't think Vegas had much of a choice in this game just based on the fact that it's DC at home. Like that's kind of a tough sledding for them. Also, Hundley getting hurt didn't help either. That was unfortunate. I was hoping to see a little more, dynamic play. And look, Luis played well off the bench, and that's what he does. We've talked about that before. I said 2 weeks ago, this is not the end of Luis Perez. He's going to show back up at some point. He did not have, unfortunately for him, the end of the first half didn't go according to plan, and that's why Rod Woodson was in such a tizzy. But Luis Perez did as much as he could given the circumstances. But this DC team is just, they're firing on a lot of cylinders right now, and it's really tough to slow them down.
Yeah, this was a disaster from the first 6 seconds of the game. Evan, thoughts on it? Just the Vipers just cannot. Nothing can go their way. They seem to be cursed with bad luck.
Yeah, boy, the Vipers have had some terrible. If I'm Rod Woodson or even anybody on that team, I'm just kicking myself because you're 0-4, but the roster isn't 0-4. I don't think the coaching's 0-4. It's one of those tough things, and we'll talk about San Antonio later because I think they're kind of in a similar position, although they've at least won a game up to this point. But yeah, DC's a tough opponent. They've really proven themselves, and I don't want to say DC surprised me because I've been a De'Aaron King stan for many years now, and the rest of that team. That run game is insane, just kind of like Houston's passing game. It's like, how do you stop it? But I think it's more of the coaching for DC that surprises me. I did not expect Reggie Barlow to be, undefeated up to this point. And that's not to discredit him. It's just, all the jobs that he's had in the past were at smaller colleges. You're working with a bit of a different talent level here in the XFL. It's honestly above what he was dealing with in college, despite what some people might think or believe. So I think that, to me, is the most impressive part about DC. And yeah, that game went about as I expected. It's a shame for Vegas. They were put in a tough spot. You're 0-3. You really want to get your first win because at 0-4, your playoff hopes are all but gone unless you, win out, essentially. But yeah, tough spot for them. And, I feel for every game I watch Rod Woodson on the sideline and I feel for him. It's not like the Guardians, and I brought that up with Terrell Buckley, where it's like, okay, man, what are you doing? Clearly there's some problems here that, you can't control or you're not handling right. But with Woodson, it's just like he seems to get the bad end of the stick every time. It's like no one can do the right thing for him. And I think at this point, Vegas should at least have one win under their belt. They definitely have not been one of the best teams in the league. The record doesn't indicate that. Yeah, they have a bunch of old NFL guys, but so far they haven't been that great. But 0-4 is pretty surprising. And again, it's a shame that that's where they're at. But maybe they'll turn something around. And next week, I guess we've got the XFL's version of a tank bowl with the Guardians and the Vipers. Both are 0-4, so someone's gonna have to win that next week.
It's gonna be sad. I like Woodson. I've liked him since we met him down at the Arizona showcase. I thought he was great. I like the behind the scenes. We're seeing the sidelines and him in the locker room, and he's like singing to the guys. Like I thought that was a good look. I'm like feel like I'm learning more. And then at the end of the first half, Luis runs in. He gets stopped, and it's one of those things that I think everybody in their mind understands why they didn't get the ball again, but it's so hard to explain that on the broadcast to the coach. Like when you're in the heat of the moment, like, well, no, if he was stopped, you would never be able to get the ball back up, go again. We're running it off. I thought Dean at least was decisive and clear with that, But I mean, Woodson, it looked like they were going to have to physically escort him off the field. I mean, he was looking heated. But I like to see that. I like to see that from a coach really care. Andy, what did you make of Rod Woodson? I mean, meltdown's not the right word, but it was kind of a meltdown.
It was, but I mean, it's frustration. I mean, his team is 0-3. He's about to go 0-4. There's just been no good breaks with this team. One of our commenters pointed out that Vegas took the bad weather with them to DC, and he's right. They've had some just horrendous luck with weather this entire season, whether it's cold, whether it's wet, whether it's windy. Doesn't matter. It's been awful for them. And that's really unfortunate for his team. It's just been bad luck for Vegas, ironically enough. Coming from a gambling city, they have not been able to hit any of their numbers or crap at the craps table at all. But, look, the rule's the rule, and Dean Blandino explained it carefully and articulately that's the ruling on the field, and that's just how it is. I don't blame Woodson for feeling emotional. He also was starting to get into it with one of the officials saying, hey, look, they're really chippy on the other side. They're starting fights. I think he's drawing to what happened with St. Louis the week before, and maybe, trying to draw up sort of an idea of like, hey, there's a little bit of a reputation with this DC team. They fight a little bit, I don't want to say dirty, but maybe with a little bit more chippiness than some other teams. And maybe they do, but I think that's their play style, and they play to it well, and they frustrate teams, and they shut them down on defense, and they run the ball, and they keep the ball away from you. And that's just something that's not fun. Like it's a play style that is going to mess your day up. Now, let's see what they can keep doing it on the road, but at home, at least, I mean, you play right into their hands every single time. But Woodson, understandably frustrated.
And then they come out from the half, right? They get the kickoff fumble return, and then they get stopped. Like they because you're like, okay, this is the world making things right. Like, okay, and then they still can't get anything going. It's just a nightmare there. Evan, anything else from this? We can go back to talk more in depth about the San Antonio game or the St. Louis game.
Just really hope Vegas wins next week against Orlando. I just want to see Rod Woodson and that team get a win. I don't want to say I'd rather see them win than the Guardians, because there's a couple guys on the Guardians I'm rooting for, but I think someone commented earlier, this Vegas team at 0-4 does look a lot different than the Guardians at 0-4. It's a tale of two worlds, where Vegas has just, again, had a lot of bad luck, where with Orlando, it's like, okay, yeah, you guys are really bad, and this is a problem.
Yeah, no, it absolutely feels totally different. You feel like Vegas is just almost there, where I don't think you've ever felt like the Guardians have been anywhere near winning any of these times. Another team that, certainly not doing well. I don't know if anyone honestly expected them to come in and give the Battlehawks, they gave them a run for their money for a minute there, but Renegades 2-2, it feels like they could be 0-4, really not doing well. St. Louis, Darius Shepard had a touchdown. Friend of the show there, was excited to see that. Andy, big takeaways. Battlehawks looking like who we think they are. Are they better than we expect?
I think they're right about where I expected them. Their defense plays also extremely well in most circumstances. I think their offense gets it done enough. I do think A.J. McCarron played really well yesterday, and the stats don't really even show that. I think he was very decisive. He moved on the run really well. He did have that one pass that sailed over his receiver and got picked off, but other than that, I think he played very well. He's clearly putting himself into the conversation for potential MVP voting down the stretch. I was a little skeptical the first 2 weeks, but the last 2 weeks have convinced me he's really been starting to lock in with his receivers. Brian Hill was great, had a great game, really balanced attack for St. Louis. I think even though at times it was a little sluggish, I think they were able to get enough done. I mean, look, Arlington has a good defense. They have a really good defensive unit. That can't be lost on people. It's just that their offense is just dead in the water right now as far as running style, as far as getting any semblance of anything in the passing game. I know Kyle Sloter's trying to come on. I think he missed a couple of throws yesterday. There were a couple that he didn't get there on time or just underthrew and just couldn't quite get to his receivers. I think play calling wise, they had a better game plan yesterday than they did against the Guardians. But again, they're stuck right now. They're really stuck. And yeah, they could be 0-4, but because of their special teams and because of their defense, I think they've managed to squeak by and get enough there. But if they're going to, like I said last week, if they're going to even think about being in the playoffs, they've got to start doing more on offense.
Yeah, it's just Sloter. I just can't figure out. He can't get anything going. He felt like he was under duress the whole time. I don't know if that's his issue. I was glad to see, you said Darius Shepard and then Brian Hill. Joe Wallace. Like all friends of the podcast all had outstanding days yesterday. That's exciting to see. To talk with. And I will say it was so funny. Darius Shepard was on. really quiet guy, just doesn't have a lot to say, trying to do the interview. And I'm like, it is what it is. And I see the halftime, he just gets a walk-off touchdown going in halftime. He's the same for the the ESPN crew or whatever. So good to know it's not just me that can't properly interview Darius Shepard, but good to see him have success there. Evan, thoughts on just the Renegades stagnation here?
Yeah, well, I think the Renegades, at one point, I think at the beginning of the season, they had the best odds to win the championship. And I think that's, they're pretty far away from that right now. The Drew Plitt experiment, unfortunately, did not go to plan. I was very interested to see, how Drew Plitt would perform. Again, I did expect Slaughter to start from week 1, and Plitt came out there for the first 2 weeks, and it wasn't great. Unfortunately, again, that was a guy where I thought maybe, there was something in camp that we didn't see, considering he got the starting job. But, now it's apparent that Slaughter's the better guy, even if the offense is still slow. But yeah, Arlington's an interesting team. I do think they could make the playoffs, just given, San Antonio's recent struggles. But yeah, like, it's really just a tale of kind of like their offense is, very far below where they need it to be, maybe far below expectation. And then their defense has been great. I mean, their defense, man, geez, I know Houston, when they came and played Houston, like, I've seen them live, and yeah, those guys know how to play. It's quite something. I think that could definitely help them out, later in the season. But even they barely beat the Guardians, and that to me was a bit of a worrisome sign. I was like, okay, well, everyone looks at the Guardians, it's like, well, that's going to be your get right game. And it wasn't their get right game. That was 10-9. That was, not what it should have been at all, really, for either team. But especially, you can shine the spotlight on Arlington. So no, I did not expect them to go into St. Louis and win that game either, just given the way things have gone for them the past couple of weeks. I thought it was kind of funny, Kyle Slaughter at the beginning saying, like, let's send 50,000 people home sad or whatever. And I was like, all right, buddy, well, we'll see about that. I mean, I think you said something about, well, hopefully he doesn't get criticized for getting the number wrong, because it was really less than 40,000. But hey, it makes it sound better, so we'll give him that. But no, I think, Arlington, the next couple of weeks for them are going to be pivotal. And really, again, for San Antonio too, haven't talked about them yet, but I keep bringing them up. Those 2 games that they have against each other, that's really for that second spot in the South playoffs. I think that's going to be a fascinating matchup to see. Obviously, they've got games to play after that could really, be the deciding factor. But those 2 games, that they still have to play against each other, I think are going to be one of the better storylines to follow this season, because Houston looks like they're already, going to have that number 1 spot in the South, barring any setbacks. They could, lose a game or 2, and I think they'll still get it without a problem. But really, that number 2 spot, I think, is up for grabs. I view Arlington or San Antonio as almost equivalence. I think Arlington has maybe a bit of an upper hand because A, they have 1 more win, and B, their defense is probably better. Both teams have had offensive problems. But yeah, that'll be something to watch. I know that's getting a bit off topic from the St. Louis game, but yeah.
No, that's good. I like it. No, I would agree. I mean, it's Houston number 1 with a bullet there, and then San Antonio and Arlington somewhere in there. Yeah, I didn't want Slaughter to be canceled by all the USFL stands when you got the attendance figure wrong of 50,000, 38,310. So a lot of numbers floating around. It's like 47 more than the Demons game back in 2001. Andy, Mike has a question. Better Brian Hill TD celebration, the People's Elbow or the Surf's Up from yesterday?
I like the Surf's Up, but I think the People's Elbow plays a little bit better. First of all, where's there any surf in St. Louis? That's my question. I don't see a beach anywhere near there. So I think that the People's Elbow, and it just plays better to the atmosphere again. Like yesterday, I know this has been brought up a million times, and you can agree or disagree, but I think there really is like a WWE atmosphere to some of these games. There's just a lot of hype, a lot of, I don't want to say manufactured energy, but like there's definitely a lot more just a lot more effort in being put into being a little bit more showmanship in some of these games. And I think with the People's Elbow, it really feels that way. Like there's all of this just energy that goes with it, and it plays into the history with the league in 2001. Obviously Vince McMahon being the previous owner, obviously the Rock now being involved. It's just it's kind of goes with the theme of the whole league. So for me, the People's Elbow is probably a little better, but I like a good Surf's Up. I just, there's no beach in St. Louis. So
I liked, so I saw someone post, the Rock, because Danny was at the game, right? Rock did a pre Right? Was she at the same? She was at the Houston. Was she at the St. Louis game? Am I making that up?
Yeah, she was. She was
Yeah.
interviewed
Okay.
at the game. So yes.
Yeah, so she was there, but then The Rock had the video, right? And I don't know how you don't just finally the XFL is returned to St. Louis. Like, I don't know how that's not part of the video, but The Rock's new catchphrase, like, let's ball out, baby. Like, that doesn't play. Dwayne, happy to workshop. You've had you've had decades of success here with wonderful catchphrases, but it's time to, whatever it is, it's time to ball out, baby. Does not work. Evan, do you have any thoughts on the Rock's trademark line? Anything else from this game, or we'll go back to the Dragons game?
Yeah, I mean, you could say what you want about it. I thought it was okay. Yeah, it's very basic. It's very boring, but I mean,
Evan's trying to maintain his XFL follow.
Look, the fact that he even, said something to put up on that big screen, I think, signified the event. I mean, he was at the Oscars that day. He could have easily just left it all to Danny, but yeah.
Evan's trying to keep that XFL follow. Don't want to set them too much. Anything else from the Renegades or St. Louis here? We could talk general thoughts at the end. Anything else from the game? We'll go backwards.
As far as the game goes, I think St. Louis is coming into their own as far as an identity. Their offense and their defense all plays cohesively together. And by the way, they get 4 more of these home games, so they have a significant advantage down the stretch. At also being 3-1 and second in the division, that plays a huge role going down the stretch. So you still have 4 more basically death traps for other teams to deal with the rest of the season. So good advantage for them. And look, Arlington's got to figure out the next 2 each, which we'll get into.
Yeah, I just when I saw the crowd coming in through the gate, they're showing. I mean, just the crowd shots at the beginning. It really was overwhelming there. Next game up here, and hate to say, your boy Reed was watching the Kraken. We were down the road at Climate Pledge watching. I watched the game highlights, checked out everything later, but we watched the Kraken take the Dallas Stars, number 1 team in the Central Division, to overtime. We lost, but it was wonderful there. For the first half of this game, I'm looking at the score on my phone. Did not seem like we missed a lot. So I turned to my buddies because we sold our tickets to one of my friends. I said, I think we made the better decision here with like 6-6 at halftime. Danucci had the one turnover at the end. I forgot I was going to start the show today and tell Andy, I am going to kill you. Any thoughts? Wild with Hazlitt and all that at the end there. Thoughts on overall on Sea Dragons in San Antonio, Andy?
Look, Seattle's defensive line won this game. They hassled Jack Cohn the entire game. He was completely flustered. He was under pressure. I mean, look, they don't want to be throwing the ball 39 times. That's not their game plan, but they had to because they absolutely could not run the ball again. Like, this is the same problem that Arlington's having. They just cannot seem to get anything going on the ground. They're able to play action, which I think Cohn works a lot better off when he's doing play action bootlegs, and he can't do that here because they just don't have any threat of the run attack, and he can't get the ball out to his receivers, his really tall receivers. I know he had a couple of injuries as well, but on the offense. But look, this is just the San Antonio operation offensively is just not getting it done. And then for the Sea Dragons, look, Ben DiNucci played well enough. Obviously, that turnover at the end is what drew the ire of Jim Hazlitt. He was about ready to take him down. But one of the biggest things that I take away for the second week in a row is that Morgan Ellison's a beast, man. He's great. This is such an asset for Seattle to work with. This is a great running back who plays hard. He runs angry every single time he gets the ball. He's been outstanding for this team the last couple of weeks. He's really given some balance this attack. Finally, June Jones is running the ball. Finally, they're also not going for 3 every single time they score a touchdown. Like, that's almost shocking that they didn't go for 3. I know the math played out and they went up by 9. It's like, okay, all you need is 1 to go up by 10. But we've seen this team go for 3 every single time. So for them to finally, I think balance-wise, Seattle's figuring it out. They just got to stop turning the ball over. And I think they'll be okay.
Yeah, I had looked at the box score until, 41 pass attempts to 39 pass attempts is really crazy here. June Jones is seemingly allergic to running the football. Evan, thoughts on this? And I just thought that was so out of character for Hazlitt. Like, he seems like and he was like very serious. I mean, it wasn't really that joking.
Yeah, well, to start with the Hazlitt stuff before I get into the actual game, I mean, yeah, I was a bit surprised. I thought it was kind of a joke, but then I rewatched it, and I was like, maybe it isn't. Like maybe he was really that heated in the moment. But personally, I was surprised to see that. I mean, I know Seattle loves to pass. It's the run and shoot with June Jones. When you're not going to throw the ball, I was still surprised to see him throw on that last drive after they stopped San Antonio on 4th down. And then, DiNucci threw that pick. And I was like, oh, well, I knew it wasn't going to be a big deal because San Antonio's offense had been so poor in that game that I really didn't think that was going to be the time for them to string together some sort of, crazy game-winning drive where they get the touchdown and then the 3-point conversion. I just really didn't see it. The big question, or the big, not question, I guess takeaway for me from this game is when are we going to see Reed Sinnett at quarterback for San Antonio? Because I look at Jack Cohn, and, Jack Cohn has been very, very okay for the past 3 weeks. Like, it's been nothing spectacular. He moves the ball well, but San Antonio's biggest problem is they can't score. I think back to that Houston game in week 3 where they pitched that goal line stand, and that would have, had San Antonio scored there, I mean, that would have been a game. That would have really given, I don't want to say San Antonio would have won that. Maybe I'm biased, but I would have given them a really good shot at that point in the game, just given, sort of they had been trending upward in that second half. And then in the Seattle game, it felt like they had, a lot of opportunities. It was still only a 1-score game, when the clock hit 000, it was 15-6. But yeah, I just look at that team and, it's a lot like Arlington. Again, I mentioned before with the offensive struggles, it's hard to say, who's worse on offense. I mean, Dallas has already played 2 quarterbacks, whereas I guess San Antonio's only played 1. But even then, man, like it's a shame because, I feel like both teams that are struggling on offense there in the South, Arlington and San Antonio, have a lot of talent. I mean, you look at this team, you've got Jacques Patrick, Kalen Ballage, and then you think of their receivers, you think of they've got Jalen Tolliver, TJ Vache, although he didn't play in that game. He was pretty good against Houston. And then I won't name all the Arlington guys for time's sake, but, it's kind of a head scratcher. I think some of it's play calling. Will that be changed? I don't know. I think maybe, you got to lose a couple more games before you start deciding things like that. But, with playoff spots on the line, like, again, I keep bringing it up. It's just this Arlington San Antonio game. I mean, whoever, loses that kind of matchup or comes out of it with the disadvantage, they're going to be kicking themselves because I feel like both of these teams could easily be above 500 right now, just from a pure talent perspective. And it's hard to say what's happening, but this is, I think, sometimes just what happens in a new league. You're bringing in guys on short notice and everyone kind of has to gel. I mean, a lot of people would say, oh, well, we're already in week 4 and these guys had a training camp together. Well, still a lot of things to figure out. I mean, it's not like we're dealing with new rules here and everything. Like it's all different. You're operating from a hub. Like this is not the NFL really not anyway. I mean, it's similar, but to finish my point, I think, I thought San Antonio, I didn't expect San Antonio to win this game either, just like I didn't expect Arlington to beat St. Louis, but I thought they could have made it a bit more competitive. I felt like, this was not the best game for Seattle either. And they've had, a couple times this season where I thought they were that close. If DiNucci doesn't fumble or turn it over, maybe they would have won. But with the Brahmas, it was like, okay, guys, like, are you going to compete or are we just going to sit here and, kick a couple field goals and then, wait till the last 2 minutes to try and do something, but it's not going to work out because you've lost momentum. I don't know. It's just, it's all interesting to me. It's interesting to see how all these things play out and how they will play out.
Well, and I wonder if, and I did find the clip here I want to play just because I want to hear it on the podcast because Dorothy's going to be like, what the hell are you guys talking about? I wonder if Hines, you give Cohen, like we give him a longer leash and like I've been a player and I don't know if that goes into it, right? Like have a little more empathy that way. We got to, and I think I have it set up so we can hear the audio on here.
I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you.
There you go. Put that in my cell phone. I want that to be my alarm clock waking up in the morning. Anyway, just remarkable there, but good crowd. I thought good crowd at Lumen. Like I said, my buddy took his fiance and kids to the game. It seemed like it was a good time, entertaining. Any other thoughts about the Sea Dragons, Andy, who, looked to be maybe second in the North, but now St. Louis is coming up here. I think they're going to be fighting for that third spot. What do you make?
Yeah, the North Division is going to be a heavyweight fight the rest of the way. And if Seattle continues to perform well on offense and not turn the ball over, again, that's their biggest thing. They're really the only team that, other than teams obviously like the Orlando Guardians or the Vegas Vipers, who shoot themselves in the foot as well, Seattle at least has potential in terms of like their roster. And I think also in terms of what they've been able to get out of a lot of their skill position players. They just have to stop, making these mistakes. By the way, I just wanted to say real quick before we move on, Luke Barku, the cornerback for the Brahmas, balled out on Saturday night. He was incredible. And I know the broadcast kept highlighting him over and over and over and over again, but he really was that good. Like, he was locking down Josh Gordon. He didn't let a lot of passes get over his head. He got the pick off of Danucci. He was exceptional on Saturday night. And I think that's the kind of play style you will hope to get from some of these guys who just step up and have that game and get their names on the map. And I do think Seattle, bouncing off of that, has a lot of kinds of guys like that, but they have to make sure that they finish games. Otherwise, you're going to be seeing a lot more clips like that from Hazlitt, but maybe inside the locker room and not on the field.
And I'll bring up your article at the end, Andy, when we kind of do our recap, because I don't want to forget that. And then you almost let me forget we were going to talk about the announcers and the broadcast for this game. So I'm glad that I remembered. And I want to get Evan's thoughts. There was a lot of feedback, especially the Sea Dragons Brahmas game coming out. Like, all they're talking about is players wanting to go to the NFL, and they're talking about the NFL. That's all I saw when I came home Saturday night. And you could have me talking about the beer snake like they did. I mean, they got to talk about something. Evan, thoughts on that there's too much emphasis on the XFL broadcasters talking about players wanting to get to the NFL versus winning XFL games or winning an XFL championship?
Yeah, well, I think it's an interesting point. I'm glad you brought it up because earlier I was going to say, well, we were talking about Morgan Ellison and how June Jones, I think, has finally discovered who that guy is and what he can do. That's a guy who I would say he deserves the NFL shot, just like the broadcasters would say about guys like Luke Barku and a couple others. But yeah, I think, is it a bit much? Yes. But the broadcast, I think, has done a bit much with other things too, like the betting stuff, the gambling. They talk about like the over-under a lot spread. Again, that was a big part of the XFL in 2020, and I don't imagine that to change. I think the reason they're probably talking about that so much is because they know that a lot of people who are watching those games are NFL fans, not XFL fans. So you're kind of trying to draw in that connection of like, hey, maybe this guy will be playing on your NFL team next year. So you can say you were watching him here first, and that's kind of like your not claim to fame, but like, oh, well, I watched this guy when he was good in the XFL, before he came and did this with whatever team. So I think that, to me, is the reason why they bring it up so much. But I do wish a bit, that they would talk about, just the team that they're on now. Like, okay, it's great, you're playing well. You might get a chance to be in a camp, come June or July or whatever. But it's like, for teams like Houston or DC, it's like, well, maybe you should talk to these guys about, their path to a championship, what that looks like, how they've been able to accomplish that so far. Not just, oh, this team is really good, they have a lot of talent. That means the most guys from that team will go to the NFL. So, yeah, again, do I think that's going to change either? No, I think we're going to hear about the NFL every week on the XFL broadcasts. But there's a reason for that, and I think it's justified enough, for people like us who kind of just are watching it for the product that it is and not because we're just, NFL casuals who kind of miss the season. It does get a bit annoying, a bit repetitive, but kind of hard to escape that. They're going to keep talking about it, especially, by the end of the season, once players have really sort of completed their season, I guess.
It's hard, like, and I'll get Andy's thoughts on this, and then we'll go to the last game. Like, you got to talk about something. These games are a little bit slower sometimes than your traditional NFL game, especially when we're doing replays and we're talking to Dean and there's a little bit of dead time sometimes. We could be talking about hot dogs and beer snakes, and we were talking mustard on the hot dogs the game last night. I watched even the Kraken games on TV where it's, hockey is pretty intense action. We're talking food and stuff. Like, you got to talk about something. I do think it's a crutch there. Like, you're never going to have it. When I had Kevin Kugler on a couple of times with Fox Sports, and we talked with him about how does he prepare for calling like the spring league games or the USFL games, because and he said, you talk about Tom Brady in the game. Everybody knows Tom Brady's whole history, right? I got to sit down. I got to research every single one of these players before the game. And there's just not that much to talk about for every single one of these people when this is only one game of whatever you're doing for the week for Fox Sports or ESPN or FX or whatever. So like it's a crutch. And like the XFL is called the League of Opportunity. And as long as it's called the League of Opportunity, we're going to be talking about that. Andy, any other thoughts on that? Then we can get to the Guardians game.
I mean, look, all I have to do is point to the interview that you two had with Anthony Becht down in Arizona, who literally said, if all of the players from my roster went on to the NFL the next season, I consider that a success. I mean, there is that permeated idea in this league that there's going to be an opportunity for these players, these coaches, these scouts, personnel, all these people in this league are going to move on to bigger and better things at some point. Now, would they love them to stay around? Of course. Yeah, of course they would. You know, you want to have like stalwart coaches. You want to have star players. You want to have consistency in your staff from year to year. Of course you do. But you also have to be realistic in that some of these people are going to move on at some point, and their intent and purpose is to be in this league, is to move on. A lot of these players have talked about the calendar works better for me, and the calendar works better for them because guess what? It's earlier time for them to prepare for training camp. I know it's ad nauseum. I know we bang the table about it, but that's just the reality of the situation. Should the broadcasters have maybe a little bit more maneuverability in terms of maybe talking about certain plays or talking about certain storylines? Yes, I agree. Maybe they do use it a bit too much, the NFL crutch. But again, it's ESPN. I mean, it's they have Monday Night Football on their product. The NFL is on the minds of everybody, even when they're watching this product. That's just how the casual fan views it. They always are going to compare it to, how does this compare to the NFL? Even if a casual football fan, like that's just going to be one of the first thoughts that comes up. So I think it's something they have to work through. I agree, but I'm not surprised that it comes up as much as it does, and I don't think it's offensive, in my opinion.
Andy, Daryl Johnston told me that the USFL's April to June timeline was the best timeline to get into for the NFL. So I don't want to hear what any of these players that are playing in these leagues have to say about that, because that's what Daryl Johnston told me. Last game here, and then we'll do key takeaways and everything. And this will dovetail in. Andy and I are going to have a personal story here at the end. Hopefully you watched more than 2 minutes of this game if you're Marshall Ferguson. But for those of us that watched the game, saw a 40 burger put up by the Houston Roughnecks here. I really not even close. I sometimes my sports app that I get scores sent to me for the XFL, it's like delayed or it's wrong. It doesn't. And so I got the notification. We just got to the bar. It said 20-0 the Roughnecks. And I go, this can't be right. I go to the XFL website. I said, holy God, they're up 20-0 here. AJ Smith running the clinic. We saw the double forward pass as originally created in the XFL in 2020, back with Sam Schwartzstein. Evan, thoughts on your Houston Roughnecks here, really just a wrecking shop against the Guardians?
Yeah, well, I talked about it in my preview article a bit. I was kind of saying, well, this game, there's no reason for Houston to lose this game. As a matter of fact, they should probably improve on their victory from week one, which was by 21 points. And yeah, they easily did that. They won by, I think it was 28 this time around. So yeah, I mean, it was about what I expected and then some, even though we were playing in Orlando. I mean, hell, AJ Smith breaking out that forward double pass, and that was beautiful in honor of Mike Leach. And at first I saw that and I had to jog my memory because it looks so, someone put on Twitter, they go, cool play, but it looks so illegal. And I thought the same thing. I saw Jontre throw it and I thought, is that going to count? And then they brought up the rule and I was like, oh, that's right, you can do that, huh? Like they definitely drew that up on purpose. And then, after that I was like, wow, like that really is amazing. You wouldn't really see that very often. And I think it helps too that Jontre is a former quarterback, so he has the ability to do that. And, he was joking around after saying, the ball's a bit wobbly. I got to be better than that. Jontre's a really funny guy. I've talked to him a couple of times. He's a very good dude. But yeah, no, I mean, clinic would definitely be a way to put it. As much as the score, at 44-16, it was a blowout. But there was a time where Orlando was crawling back there. It was 26-16 at one point. Charleston Rambo had an 80-yard touchdown. Good to see him get going a bit. Charleston Rambo is one of those guys that I had high hopes for going into the season. Obviously, not knowing then that the Guardians were going to be this way. But, yeah, I mean, there were definitely moments like Houston kind of had their bit in the game where they slowed down, had a couple 3-and-outs. But by that point, it really didn't matter. I knew we were going to win. And, what's his name, Dijon Lee. It was good to see him get involved in the second half with 2 rushing touchdowns. I put out a tweet and said, before the season, Wade Phillips did an interview. I forget who it was with, and I think the person asked, like, what players are you looking forward to watching this season? He could have easily said, Brandon Silvers, John Trey Kirkland, Max Borghi. But no, he said Dijon Lee was one of those guys that he really had his eyes on, kind of like a gem, I think. And, to see him, finally get involved, especially in an offense where you're not running a lot. I put in my article too, I said, well, in the second half, it would be nice to see kind of a different offense where you're running it more to kind of put the game away. And that's exactly what they did for the most part. They were running a bit more. They felt more comfortable doing that. I think, it was a good game all around, at least for me. I quite enjoyed that. Again, it was over pretty quick. I mean, it was 20-0. And then, Orlando tried to come back. And then by the third quarter, it was like, nah, this is going to be Houston's game. But yeah, I was, again, I feel like every week Houston finds a way to build upon themselves and improve. And even from week 1, right out of the gate, they've been really good. They've been sort of setting the standard across the XFL of like, okay, hey, this isn't just some bush league, that has some random players. Like, no, these guys can, really do their job well. And it shows. So again, this week, again, yeah, you're playing Orlando. It's not the best opponent, but I mean, that was, again, another just all-out fantastic performance. And I do think Seattle, given the way they've played recently, will bring a bit more challenges on Thursday because it's a short week and they're playing in Seattle. It's the first time that they're really, I guess, going to the cold. I don't know what temperature in Seattle is supposed to be that night.
It's cold. It's cold right now.
I was going to say, it's definitely not what the weather's been in Houston, where it's like 70 at kickoff every night. But yeah, that might be, again, I've had that game on the calendar for a while circled. I think that'll be an interesting matchup, at least schematically. But yeah, no, all around, I was impressed with Houston. Orlando, again, still got work to do. Buckley was chewing out his OC on the sidelines, and there was a couple other things that. The one thing I'll talk about or point out about Orlando before I'll stop blabbling on and I'll let Andy talk. The penalties, man. Every Orlando game that I watch, I feel like there's a yellow, yellow light next to the scoreboard every time I turn the game on. They got to get that cleaned up. I know that at this point you're kind of just searching for a couple wins to make the season look bad rather than a complete disaster. But my God, I mean, those penalties. Houston had a couple too. We've had a couple in the games here and there, but nothing that's killed us. But for Orlando, especially, I mean, that offensive line with the holds, it's unbelievable. Or false starts, or at what point, do you try and revamp that line, or get rid of the offensive line coach? Or, I don't know. Like, it's just like, to me, we're in week 4 and these guys, that offensive line feels very Bush League, if you know what I mean. Yeah. It's like, okay, guys, I mean, you feel bad for Orlando, but how are they supposed to get anything done offensively with, the amount of times they're being set back? And again, I'm not the biggest Buckley supporter. I think he could have done a better job through the past couple of weeks. Again, he could turn it around and prove me wrong. I really hope he does. But, I get his frustration to an extent when your players are, I mean, that's not really his fault. He's not the one out there, jumping around and doing all that. I do feel bad for him because, he was kind of, I mean, he didn't have as bad of an outbreak this week as, Rob Woodson did, but he was pacing around the sidelines. He had like his hands in his, face. And I felt for him in a sense.
He needs new guys. Just I've been showing the pre-play here, and I tossed to Andy. They were talking funky, and I just searched double forward pass. I will say, Jack, cry harder. USFL Newsroom. We're talking about the double forward pass. Where did that come from? I don't want to hear this. Cry harder. That's all I have to say on that. Andy, any thoughts on the game? We'll get into Marshall's comments and all that, but thoughts on the game as a whole.
Before I get into that, I just wanted to say the number of people I saw on my timeline this past weekend calling this double forward pass gimmicky was astounding. I want to let's point out a couple of things. By that token, if you're going to call this play gimmicky, then what is the waggle in CFL? What is playing a yard off the line of scrimmage and basically making the quarterback sneak automatic? I think your definition of gimmicky or innovative is in the eye of the beholder. That is, in my opinion, what has happening on my timeline this past weekend. Look, I think it's a rule that you take advantage of, and AJ Smith did a fantastic job of that. The USFL ran it last year. I didn't hear one peep about it being gimmicky last year. I didn't hear anything about 2-point or 3-point conversions being gimmicky last year. So it's kind of funny that suddenly that becomes a thing. And yes, Sam Schwartzstein was pumping his fist this weekend because he's seeing all of this play out. And, this was part of his mindset of getting this into the game. Look, also, you can't overvalue the emotional aspect of that play, too. AJ Smith talked about that play. They called it the Mike Leach play. They called it that play in honor of Mike Leach and the air raid offense. And he'd been waiting years to run that play. He said it himself. He had been waiting so long to run that play. And you could just see with the confidence that he ran it with, how excited he was when he ran it. He was so proud of himself after that game. And he should be, because it was a great play. It was a great design, drew up, and it was executed perfectly. Is that not kind of the whole point of this entire operation here, is having these plays put into the game to innovate the game, to push the game forward? I just don't understand this whole thing about it being gimmicky. I just, that part really kind of miffed me this past weekend. That's really the only thing I wanted to say about that. I don't want to get further into the individuals that said that.
Yeah, sorry, I was just trying to show, but just seeing the emotion here of AJ just absolutely going bonkers. Friend of the show here has been friend of all of ours, and we've been tracking AJ for a long time. But incredible. Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, Andy.
No, not at all. And I mean, he deserves it. He deserves his flowers, and he deserves what he got from that play. It was fantastic for him. It was fantastic for Houston, who just steamrolled the Guardians. I mean, I'm not surprised, but man, 40 points, and they should have scored 50. They didn't make some of their conversion attempts. They should have scored 50 points in that game. They ran them over. And I'm also happy to see that they finally started running the ball with some sort of authority, especially in the second half. That was kind of one of the big criticisms about Houston, was they were not scoring in the second halves of these games. They were kind of going to cruise control and just letting their defense do the work. That was not the case here. Dijon Lee looks great. Even though Bryson Aline got the start, Lee was running people over. He was really kind of a great chance, a great change of pace for this offense, because offensively they weren't able to throw the ball with as much authority as they were in the first half. And Orlando was starting to make some plays there in the third quarter, but good to see Houston really adjust and just kind of show a complete performance. Overall, they were just fantastic from start to finish, as they should have been against this Orlando team, which we've talked about ad nauseum as just being in shambles. But Houston put on a clinic, and I'm already going to go ahead and say that set the over-under for like 80 points next week against Seattle, because that is going to be an absolute barn burner.
Yeah, gimmicky. Gimmicky. 3-minute warning. I think that's gimmicky in the CFL. Why is it a 3-minute warning? Why do we have a 3-minute warning on that? Andy and I will get into our new feud here. Evan, any other final thoughts on this game, and then we'll talk Marshall Ferguson, and then we'll talk key takeaways with Andy's article. We'll try to get out of here at the hour.
Yeah, I mean, just going back to AJ Smith for a minute, I remember being there in week 1, and there's this guy, Joe Gleason from ABC Houston, who was doing an interview with AJ. And, I've talked to AJ a couple of times at the games. Again, great guy. But, in that interview, he was saying, or at least he told Joe, whether it was on or off the camera, I forget, but he was talking about how, how surreal it was, because, AJ was on that field 3 years ago at that same stadium with the same team, with June and the rest of those guys running the same thing. And, that only lasted 5 weeks, and then they, had to pack it up and leave. And, AJ, he was just talking about how, he never thought, we'd be back, and yet here we are. And, to see him now, be the guy who's calling plays and, doing all this stuff. Because remember, he was only the wide receivers coach in 2020. Now he's the offensive coordinator. So he's moved up a level. But to see him do that, it's phenomenal. I'm so happy for him. And, he really deserves that. I don't know if he's watching this or not, but, he left the XFL, went to the spring league, did some stuff at Tyler Junior College, and I think he went back to Calvary Baptist in Shreveport up in Louisiana, if I remember correctly. He's been a lot of places, but this to him, I think, really means a lot. And it's good to. It's a very, I don't know how to put it. My heart warms to think of that. Seeing that play specifically, I was like, well, he really has been waiting years for that, and even before the XFL. In 2020, I think, AJ's known, or he did know Mike Leach for a very long time. So just to see that all kind of come together and, get such a dominant win, it just, we joke about the script a lot, but that was a pretty damn good script if I can write one up.
Yeah, it was good. So one person that was not was not so thrilled about the game, and I will say, so everyone here knows Reed, and we argue with CFL people and all that stuff. Burned a lot of, or mended a lot of bridges. We had Cody Fajardo on here a couple weeks ago, and like we're all good. And Arash and I have always been good and whatever. But 3-down dunk, and we needed a new, I guess, adversary. And Marshall Ferguson here, broadcaster over at CFL on TSN. He calls some of the games, and then he works for the CF Perspective, who. Like I've had on people from them in the past. So Connor O'Neill's been on the show, and Marshall works for CFL.ca. Tweets out, tuned into the XFL game, 5 flags, a Paxton Lynch interception, and a play-by-play trying to convince me 3 separate times how great the league is. Coming out and kind of poo-pooing. It seems like it's the in vogue thing right now. Like we need to poo-poo if we're the CFL, and because we all know the CFL and the XFL talked a couple years ago, and so people got all terrified. This win, it was big viral, and Marshall's talking about everything. My first one, I said, funny, I turn on many CFL games and see repeated 2 and outs, penalty flags. Now Marshall told me how great the CFL is. Andy tweeted on here, and then I have my final one. Andy said, this is like watching the equivalent of a movie for 2 minutes and calling it a disaster. Finally, the one that and then we'll get Andy's thoughts on this. The one that I don't know what the definition of ratioing is, but I think that this might have ratioed it. I said, Marshall woke up and chose violence. It's a tough scene when the CFL media, who've been championing their players' stories and opportunities for decades, now want to pass judgment on a 4-week-old league because A, it seems to be the in vogue thing to do, and 2, Randy and Danny DJ had a cup of coffee 2 years ago. You got scared about your league changing its rules. I support all players in all leagues. More leagues means more success for opportunity, means more opportunities for players, staff, and broadcasters. End of story. The final takeaway of this, and we'll get Andy. Marshall ended up, I guess this was in reaction to Andy's tweet, ended up tweeting out Andy's profile photo, which I guess was like a gotcha. Which, to be fair, if I had tweeted out Marshall's photo of him and his child, I would probably be in prison. So let's call a spade there. Andy, what did you make of this? This was just wild.
I think that photo he posted of me was a good-looking guy. That's what I'll say. But I look, then if he wants to clutch his pearls, fine, so be it. And I don't really care for this vitriol, this war waging that goes on between the Canadian and American border. This is insane. Like I get it. If you don't like the game, fine, don't watch it. It's okay. It's fine. You don't have to buy into it. I don't have to buy into anything that goes on across the border either. I choose to watch the CFL. I choose to watch the game because, quite frankly, and I'll be honest, the only reason I really started watching was because guess what? The XFL people started talking to them. I can't believe the amount of vitriol that goes on the other side here. It's insane. And look, Mr. Ferguson, if you want to have an amicable conversation with me about whatever, about movies or games or anything for that matter, profile pictures, my DMs are open. Come and talk to me, my friends. I'm open. I'm the professor. I will amicably talk with you about anything. Just come on down. We'll have a beer. We'll chit chat. It's fine. We'll talk football. We'll talk shop. I do it all the time.
Well, and I'll get Evan if Evan has any thoughts on this. I used to be at the point where, because Mike Mitchell's responding to Marshall and Marshall's talking with Mike. And so I'm like, I have a following. Like, do I get that same courtesy? No. Like Marshall, no response. I don't know, like, if you just kick someone's ass so bad that they're like, okay, I'm muting this conversation. I don't get it. I don't get even why. Like I said, I've had people from Marshall. I've emailed Marshall many times, inviting him on the program. I've sent him DMs, corresponded with him on I really, if you want to stay in your hole up there in Canada and the Great White North, go ahead and do that. Andy, you or Evan, we love the CFL. There's never, I can't think of a single XFL, USFL related anybody that's ever spoken a negative word about the about the CFL ever. Like, what do you make of this?
Yeah, well, I mean, originally when I first started writing, the first stuff I did was for the CFL, for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Really before I got, too deeply involved with the XFL stuff, because at that time in 2021, the CFL was playing. Like that was really the only league I guess besides the spring league that had been going on a bit before, it was really operating. So I figured that would be a good investment, and it was interesting. I went back once I started covering the Roughnecks, and especially once the XFL season started, I went and I checked all my traffic on articles from all the sites that we do, CFL, XFL, USFL, and I look back and it makes me sad because it's almost like the CFL ones I shouldn't have wasted my time with. All the XFL ones, have thousands of views. And again, that was right when the season was starting. So you kind of expect, clicks to go up when it's a buzz in the news. But I mean, the CFL ones, it's like those guys just never really wanted to bat an eye. And I feel like it's not the same way. Like, how do I put it? There's a lot of, I feel like, we've talked about it many times before, and, we're not going to name names here. It's just more of a general thing. But, the CFL sort of homers, we'll call them, tend to criticize people more, especially people like us who are in the United States, who are A, either trying to cover their league, or B, think that the XFL or USFL are a better product. Now, do I think that the XFL is a better product than the CFL? Maybe. It's hard to say, right? The CFL has been around for so long, and, I've watched that league for a couple of years now. Can't say I've watched it my whole life because I'm really young, but, I think there's pros and cons to everything, right? And it's a shame, to see this type of criticism, where these people from the CFL, at least some of them, again, not all of them, guys like Farhan have been, very open and talk about the XFL, and people like him I appreciate. But you look at these other guys and they shut everything down so quickly. It's like, nope, no XFL, no USFL, CFL is king. Where I think the three of us and, everybody else in our group, and I don't know, a couple other people outside of that, we're all kind of just, it's more of an equal playing field, right? We look at the CFL and XFL and USFL pretty evenly. I mean, Reed, you went to the Grey Cup, man. You went this year, you went last year. Like, it's kind of hard to, discredit you from that when, all these other people are saying, oh, well, you're, XFL lenient, or you don't like the USFL, whatever the case is. It becomes a complex matter, and it's a shame that things have gotten like that. Again, the more leagues, I guess the more competition. I was sort of hoping that once all these leagues popped up alongside the CFL, that maybe we'd all just kind of come together and say, hey, the more opportunities, the better, right? This is a players first league in any league, I guess. And those are the people I'm rooting for, because that's what makes these leagues interesting. But people pick sides and, pick and choose, whatever. I won't go on about it for too long.
Yeah, it's okay.
It's not something that we're really going to be able to fix, I don't think. But life goes on. I'm enjoying the XFL season. I'll watch a bit of the USFL, because that kind of overlaps at the end of the XFL season. And then CFL will start in the summer. So for me, I'm enjoying it all, man. That's all I'll say. I'll put a bit of a positive spin on all that, I think.
Andy, let me know if you got to get out of here. I don't want to hold you too long. We do have a little bit of breaking news here. I just got an email. We have a couple more flex games coming. USFL announcing, or XFL announcing week 5. Going to ESPN2, and then a couple games for the April 1st and 2nd. So if you're keeping track of that, just email it out. But the Sunday, March 19th game, the Renegades and Brahmas, is going to be on ESPN2. And then the Saturday games, it looks like we're moving to ESPN2, and then ESPN, and then the final one on ESPN. So flexing up some of those games, it looks like a little bit. So just to kind of keep an eye on that. Andy, I want to make sure I at least show your article on here before we go, takeaways, and then I just don't want to hold you too long. You know what I'm saying?
Of course.
Final thoughts from XFL 2023 week 4, Andy.
So, as I mentioned already, it was fantastic to see the St. Louis Battle Dome in full force. That was incredible, and I think it's going to continue the way that it has it going through the rest of the season. I think that same energy is going to be brought every single week. I don't think it was just a one-off. I think this is going to be a consistent thing for this team, for this crowd, and for these St. Louis supporters. I think they're going to continue to bring this energy every single week that they're there in St. Louis. I mean, they've been waiting 3 years for this. They've been waiting a long, long time just to have this back. I don't think they're going to be going away anytime soon. And also, I thought about it, it's like you only get to go to this event 5 times a year. That's, I think that's kind of the special element I will say about some of these spring leagues. Is like, this is more limited than even more than NFL games. And people make it an event to go to an NFL game, of course, but you already have 8 or 9 home games. in the NFL. And in the CFL, you have 9 home games. Here, you only have 5. You only have 5 chances to go one of these. If you're invested as a fan, yeah, you're going to make a point to go to it. Like that's really the case, unless there's some other circumstances, maybe like a Kraken game. But I'm giving you a little hard time read. But you know what I mean. Like I think they're going to make it a point to go to these games and go to this event every time it comes up in St. Louis. And then moving on to my next point, obviously, besides the attendance record, which is also tremendous, Houston, obviously, the offense looks great. I think they're gonna be in for a barn burner against Seattle, as I mentioned earlier in the program. They're gonna probably continue playing, hopefully, a more balanced attack again. Brandon Silvers has been great, and obviously the receivers are awesome. Probably the best receiving core in the entire XFL. But I want to continue to see them run the ball with the same authority that they had in the second half, and maybe even try doing it in the first half. Who knows? Maybe get Dijon Lee or Bryson Aline to come out. Also, Max Borghi. Forgot to mention that as well. Max Borghi wasn't even in that game. That was a big thing as well. Him not being involved. Really, the first time not having their dual threat at running back kind of involved there. They still were able to do a lot. So they get him back. That's another weapon on offense. And then finally, last thought before I go, I have to say that I just wanted to point this out. Our relocation franchises are not doing so hot. They are combined 1-11 between San Antonio, Orlando, and Vegas. This is not looking so hot for the hand-picked franchises for Danny, Dwayne, and Jerry. This is not looking so hot. And look, I get all the fanfare around them. I get why they relocated them. I get some of the venue choices, some of them great, some of them a little questionable, obviously for various reasons, but it is not going so hot on the field for all 3 of these teams. That can't be a good look. But I think it also just shows you that the established brands, the DCs, the St. Louis's, and even to an extent like the Arlingtons or Seattle, seem to have an identity and seem to know what they're doing. Also, and I don't want to make too much light of this, but the fact that you have these 3 rookie forward player head coaches kind of trying to find their way in the league and trying to establish these new franchises, it's tough. It's tough to establish an identity and to do this for the first time, and they're finding that out the hard way, unfortunately. And for the league, I'm sure they would like them to play a little bit better, but it's kind of the biggest story is that the established brands are making it known that they're still around and they're still playing at the best level in this league.
If you want to check out Andy's article, it just is up today. It always goes Monday here on XFL News Hub. Evan, final thoughts from you, and then I'll touch on the USFL schedule, and then we'll get out of here. I appreciate you guys this time.
Yeah, I mean, look, week 4, I'd say, again, kind of started off with the show saying, pretty good slate. Again, things mostly went as expected. A couple of games were a bit boring. Houston was a bit of a blowout, and then, a couple others where it was like, maybe the other team gave them a run for their money, but ultimately the team who was supposed to win did win. But again, we're really at that point in the season now where you're really starting to feel like storylines are coming together. We know now who's good and who's bad. In week 1, I mean, going all the way back, so much has happened since then. Week 1 feels like a year ago. But going back to that, it's like you didn't really know. You didn't want to overreact. You were looking at teams going, oh well, maybe this is their identity, maybe this isn't. But I think week 4 is a good time to start saying, well, this team is good and this team is bad, and these are the reasons why. That was kind of my main takeaway, I think, from this week.
Yeah, it was good. Like I said, exciting kind of on the field, off the field. I like getting in fights, and I like, it's fun. I try not to get too crazy about that anymore. Final thing, we'll get out of here. I appreciate a little over today. Try to keep this an hour. USFL, just before we came on today, they announced we had the game schedule, but now we have the TV broadcast schedule. The takeaway from me, every game is going to be, there's like no Peacock exclusive games. Every game's going to be on Fox or NBC or FS1, USA. Like every game is going to be on linear TV in that way. There's going to be 17 games on Fox, 11, or 18 games on Fox, 7 on FS1, 11 on NBC and Peacock, and then 7 on USA and Peacock. 22 games on Saturday, 21 games on Sunday, no weird Fridays or Mondays like the XFL. And then the championship game, I believe, is going to be on ESPN. To me, and if you guys, I don't want to, I'll stay here forever. You guys have lives. They're utilizing Fox, right? We're XFL. Okay, we got to kind of pick and choose, take what is given to us by ESPN, ABC, FX. I think this is great, right? Fox, like, we want this to be programming. Let's put it on Fox. We just saw here earlier in the broadcast, XFL now flexing games up to better networks, right? Kind of going the opposite way where, I don't know, does USFL flex down? Do they keep, like when you start them at this, right? You kind of got to, you can't be pulling games off of Fox. Andy, any final thoughts from you on this?
No, I think this is much better than the Peacock exclusives that were going on last season. That was obviously not fully utilizing the power of the broadcasting the broadcasting power that basically Fox and NBC had. And I think this is a lot more uniform. Obviously, the Saturday, Sunday consistency is great. And I think the XFL can get there as well. I think while it's fun to have games on Thursdays and on Mondays and potentially Fridays, I don't think the national audience really has too much of an appetite for it outside of, the NFL. So I think having that consistency in the programming is really the biggest key here, and having it on those 2 days, that will only do things to help Fox and the USFL in their ability to get it out to more television sets. So yeah, I think this is a great schedule for TV purposes. It's a lot more consistent and it's a lot more uniform. And it's kind of the next step you would hope for, especially after being a little bit difficult for teams or people to find these games on TV last year.
You heard it here first from Reed. This is a better TV schedule than the XFL has. I will, admit that. That's the benefit of being owned by the network. Expectations a lot lower for the XFL being on FX versus the USFL being on Fox. So 655 whatever thousand viewers they had last week for the Dragons game or whatever. Like, that is way more acceptable. Whatever. It's a higher network clearance, higher ratings expected. Evan, any final thoughts from you? We'll get out of here.
I mean, yeah, I haven't taken too close of a look at that USFL schedule, and I mean, I'll have to, once we're off this, I'll take a closer look at it and the games that were flexed in the XFL. But yeah, I mean, I think the USFL season, we'll see how much I'm able to watch, because right now I am doing a lot of XFL coverage, and again, I support both leagues. Don't get it twisted. It's a matter of time, right? So I do plan on watching a bit of USFL. I've got plenty of guys that I know that are playing over there, and I think it should be fun. I do expect it to be better than last year, in terms of, well, not just overall viewership and overall quality of play, but I think, expanding the hubs. I've never been a fan of like the hub format. People know that. But I think expanding that to, at least get more fans in certain markets, not all of them, again. But it's better than just having that centralized Birmingham hub, is that point that I'm getting to. Because you guys went there last year, and I know you didn't exactly have the best reviews about, the city of Birmingham hosting a pro football league, not just a team. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at on that, I think.
Awesome. Last thoughts from me. In the USFL championship game, I didn't realize this, I guess, when they announced the schedule. That's on my birthday. So maybe I can go to Canton and get in a fight with a bunch of USFL homers. Wouldn't that be fun for my birthday here? Thank you guys so much. Check out Andy's article on XFL News Hub. Follow Evan. Evan's the everything Houston Roughnecks. Appreciate everyone's time. I'm going to cut off here. I know you guys had to go. Thank you guys all so much again. We'll see you Friday. Should be a good episode. Emailing people today to get all that figured out. We'll see you next time. Thanks.